Exercise live webinars, continuing education series. Thank you so much for joining us here again today. My name is Jackie Crockford. I'm very excited to be your host once again. Before we get started with today's course, let's go over a few announcements from ACE. You've probably seen these before, but just as a reminder, make sure to join our free ACE Pro Connect app. This is a great place if you are currently certified with the American Council on Exercise for you to connect, learn, and grow with other ACE certified professionals. And once again, this is a free download for you if you are currently certified on your Apple or Android device. So take a look at the ACE Pro Connect app today. Also, we have a brand new ACE job board. This is perfect for you if you're looking for a career in the health and fitness space, or if you are an employer looking to hire. You can take a look at this new job board at acefitness.org/careers. And also we have ACE Pro Compass. Now this is a portion of our website that is dedicated to helping you navigate your career as a health and fitness expert. So you can answer a few questions at acefitness.org/compass, and those questions will take you to curated content meant just for you, depending on the direction that you want to take your career in the health and fitness industry. So once again, you can join ACE Compass at acefitness.org/compass. And lastly, remember, you are required to receive 20 hours, that's 2.0 CECs, to maintain your ACE certification, and you can do that by using the ACE Power Pass. This is a brand new option for you if you'd like to earn your CECs for one low price, and you can learn more about that at acefitness.org. Now let's go over a few logistics before today's live webinar so that you can have a great learning experience. Remember, you are watching today for free via YouTube, so take a look at your YouTube viewer. You should see a chat bar there. I will be monitoring that chat bar throughout today's presentation, so you can type in your questions for our presenter or for me, and we will get to those live questions at the end of today's presentation. Also, remember, you are joining today for free, so no continuing education credits are awarded. However, if you would like to earn CECs, you can do so by going to the link provided on your screen. That's acefitness.org/past webinars, and we'll talk more about how you can earn CECs at the end of today's presentation. All right, if you're ready for today's course, let's get started. Welcome to your course, The Science and Application of Recovery. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jackie Crockford, and I am today's host. And joining me is our presenter, Mike Deibler. Hi, Mike.
Hi, how's it going, Jackie?
Good, good. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Yes, we're excited to have you back here at ACE Studios. It's been a while.
Yes, yes.
If you have recently become certified with ACE as a personal trainer, you might recognize Mike from some of those PT videos. And we're happy to have him back here to talk about recovery today.
Yes, absolutely.
You've got your own business here in San Diego area, San Diego Premier Training, where I know that you use a lot of these modalities that we're going to talk about. So why is this an important topic for you?
You know, being a former athlete, I was really good at pushing myself. And I think many people in the fitness industry kind of love that intensity, but we don't pay attention to the recovery. And it's just something I've been passionate about, and really understanding this topic to help us get better results.
Wonderful. So I know you use a lot of these yourself and with some of your clients, so let's talk about it today. I can't wait.
All right, awesome, thank you. Okay, well, as Jackie said, thank you so much for joining me today, taking time out of your day to learn more about this. Like I said, I am really passionate about this idea of recovery. I think it's something getting more and more attention today, and we're really good at the training side, and I think we need to be really good at the recovery side to give us ultimately what our clients are looking for, better results. So our learning objectives, we want to make sure we understand a little bit about the physiology. So I want to take some time and really talk about recovery, talk about fatigue, and really what's going on in the body. I want you to be able to identify the different types of fatigue that occur as a result of training that we're going to have to recover from. And then ultimately, I want this to be practical. I want you to have a good idea of different options to help your clients recover from their training plans and ultimately get better results. I like to start with this quote here: train as often as possible, as heavy as possible, while staying as fresh as possible. I think sometimes the more I start talking about recovery methods, people think that I am not or anti-intense training, not pushing yourself. And really that couldn't be further from the truth. I want to be able to train hard, whether it's myself or clients that I'm working with, push those comfort zones. But all I'm saying is I want to start paying attention to the other side of the equation, right? So we have training, or our stimulus, plus recovery equals an adaptation. And that's all we're trying to do here, is how can we train hard more often in a recovered state? And if you can figure that out, I think you're going to be on the road to much safer and faster results for yourself or your clients. So to get started, I want to make sure we really understand as much as we can about recovery, all the different types of fatigue that our body is going to have to recover from. So to start off, why recovery? And hopefully I'm already making this clear. This is ultimately what we need to get the results that we're looking for. On the screen, we have a few different scenarios here that we might see. So if we look in the middle, a lot of times this is where a client, or maybe ourselves, where we might be at, where we're stressing the body, some form of exercise, recovering a little bit, and then we stress ourselves again to about the same level, and then we recover, and we kind of bounce back and forth. And we hit this maintenance level. Now, I don't want to make this sound like a bad thing. This might be exactly where you or your client want to be. They're happy with where they are. They're not necessarily interested in getting faster or stronger or whatever it might be. They're happy with where they're at, their lifestyle, they can support this, and they're totally fine there. So that might be a great place to be. But oftentimes, when we're not really considering the full stress recovery cycle, we see this downward trending line. And this is essentially overtraining, where we're going to stress the body, not allow sufficient recovery, try and stress the body again, not recovered enough, stress, and we see an inefficient cycle here. And this is a slippery slope that might lead to potential risk for more injury, or maybe just burnout, because every time they come back, they're actually maybe feeling weaker, less strong. They're feeling everything is getting harder and harder, and they're not seeing the benefits from it. So now maybe they just don't really want to work out anymore because they aren't getting those benefits that they should be getting. Ultimately, I think what we're looking for, right, our client's goal is to get better results. We're trying to elevate that baseline, so things should be getting a little bit easier. They're getting stronger. They have better endurance, more energy. And that's what we see with this final upward trending line. We're going to stress the body, allow sufficient recovery, stress the body, allow recovery, and we're going to see our baseline continues to rise. So one thing I'm going to keep repeating myself with is we need recovery. We need time. We're not eliminating time. What we're trying to do is use different recovery methods to hopefully shorten that recovery time, because I know the more training, the more stimulus, the more frequently we can push the body. If I'm recovered, I will get better results. But if I just assume I'm just going to train more and hope for better results, if I pay no attention to recovery, I'm going to start seeing that downward sloping line, which we want to avoid. So what is recovery? There's a few different ways we can go with this. And we can look at it internally with our physiology. We've probably all heard the term homeostasis, right? That balance, internal balance. Our body wants to expend as little energy as possible at rest. It just wants to survive, right? So it doesn't want to waste any unneeded energy. So we have very tight regulatory systems within the body to monitor any disruptions, because it wants to deal with that immediately, because it could be life-threatening, right? So we have things like temperature, pH levels, blood sugar levels, energy stores. All of these are going to be tightly regulated. Now, when we train, we are disrupting these things, right? We might see pH levels change, energy stores deplete, and other things. The body wants to return to homeostasis as quickly as possible so it can get back to expending the least amount of energy to deal with those stress. So if we're in that state of homeostasis, we can assume that we're probably in a more recovered state. We can also look almost externally in terms of performance. So if you have the ability to perform at a level at your previous level or exceeding, then we know, again, you're probably recovered. If your power levels, strength levels, endurance, things like that are back where they started, then we know we are probably more recovered. But this all comes down to energy balance. So we only have so much energy that we can utilize to deal with stress and to deal with recovery, and we need balance there. So when I exercise and stress the body, most of my energy is going to go towards dealing with that stress, trying to bring me back to homeostasis. Once I get back, now I can utilize that energy to deal from recovering from that stress. So I don't have unlimited amount of energy, so I can't just deal with the stress and then deal with recovering from that stress to an unlimited supply. So if I'm constantly stressing the body, I don't have enough energy left over to deal with that recovery. So keep that in mind. That's a big part of what we're going to be talking about, is making sure we stress appropriately, have that energy to recover, and hopefully we can do a few things to help in that process. Now, as we talk about recovery, we should talk about what we're recovering from, right? And that essentially is going to be fatigue, right? So there are different factors that are going to relate to fatigue. This is where it gets a little bit complex because it is multifactorial. You're going to have different types of fatigue on the body. But if we have a better idea of why we're fatiguing, why can't we continue to put out the same amount of work effort, we have a better idea how we can help the recovery process. Just to give you a few quick examples, think about when you're sick, right? You're fighting a cold, a flu, something like that. You're fatigued, you're run down. That is a very specific type of fatigue on your body that's going to take time for you to bounce back from. Now, maybe you just did a heavy resistance training session, right? We lifted some weight. That is a very specific fatigue, right? Maybe we created muscle damage. Our central nervous system is going to be fatigued, and we're going to deal with that type of stress and fatigue. And then maybe I did some endurance training. I ran a marathon, or I'm training for a marathon. We've reduced energy stores. That's a very specific type of fatigue. So our goal is to understand how different types of training create different types of fatigue that hopefully we can help restore and get back to that homeostatic level. Now, we can break fatigue down into two main factors, or two main categories. So we have central fatigue and peripheral fatigue. So our central fatigue essentially is anything that has to do with the brain, right? So our central nervous system. So we're looking at brain chemistry here. And then we have our peripheral factors that are going to be focusing more on at a cellular level with muscle tissue and energy demand and things like that. So I want to go through a few of the main factors that are going to affect fatigue, again, to give us a better idea of how do we address these things to speed up the recovery process. So, like I said, the central nervous system is going to be a great place to start. So our central fatigue. This is, like I said, changes in brain chemistry, neurotransmitters, firing of motor units, sequencing, things like that. So if I perform exercise and competed repetitive muscle contractions, that eventually will desensitize the nervous system to create slower motor unit recruitment and firing, and ultimately fatigue. So a lot of our heavy lifting, our power training, things like that are going to have a lot of demand on the central nervous system, so we're going to see that as one of our main factors of fatigue. We also have our muscle damage, right? We might lift weights, and that's going to cause muscle tissue damage, which is a part of the process, but it's something that we do have to recover from. So when you're feeling sore after a training session, there is a reason for that. All of these different fatigue factors are essentially trying to protect our body, right? Exercise is a form of stress, and it's a healthy form of stress if we're utilizing it properly. So we're going to try, our body is going to try and limit us so we don't injure ourselves. So we feel DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. So when you're feeling soreness, it's your body saying, we just damaged this area, I'm going to make it hurt so you don't keep doing it, right? It needs time to heal. So if you have somebody who's always sore, that's a problem. You know, moderate soreness we might be able to deal with, but if you're constantly sore after every single workout, that's telling us you're not in a recovered state, and you're not going to get the results that you're looking for because you're not allowing the adaptation to occur. Next, we have our metabolic perturbation. So energy systems has a cost, right? Us trying to create ATP to support this exercise that we're doing, there are byproducts. Just like when we fill our car with gas, drive down the road, and there's an exhaust that's emitted, that is a byproduct to this. So our metabolism works the same way. Maybe we're exercising at a really high intensity and using a lot of glucose. So we're using glycolysis to generate ATP. Once we go through glycolysis, we're going to have pyruvate. And if we can't deal with that pyruvate, we're going to convert it to lactic acid. Lactic acid is going to convert to lactate and hydrogen ions. And then if we can't deal with this and clear it out of our blood, we're going to see more and more hydrogen ions develop, which is going to interfere with muscle contraction. So a few examples of repeated muscle contractions and energy systems utilization that interfere with muscle contractions. So we have to allow that process to clean out in order to continue. Then we have energy store depletion, right? So if I'm working out at a high intensity, utilizing carbohydrates and glycogen and glucose, and those levels start to decrease, obviously my fatigue is going to set in and I cannot support that intensity for much longer. Or maybe the substrate availability isn't there, right? We have fat stores on our body, but we might not be able to utilize them at higher intensities. So that is going to be a limiting factor creating fatigue there. And then finally, we have perception, which I think is one of the more important pieces, especially for those who are maybe new to exercise. Their perception is probably going to override any physiological fatigue that they might be feeling. Picture somebody exercising for the first time. They're going to have lots of internal dialogue going on, telling them that this is hard, my legs hurt, I want to quit, I don't want to keep doing this. Those thoughts are going to take over before we have to worry about any of the other types of fatigue. Somebody who's been training longer, they can quiet those voices down and actually persist for a little bit longer. Kind of interesting, a study showing that just teaching people how to use positive self-talk increase their time trial to exhaustion by 2 minutes without changing anything else, just teaching them how to talk to themselves better. So the brain's a powerful tool, and it's going to help influence how we perform. So all of these are important factors that are going to affect fatigue. So we just want to understand that we might have to address these different things based on the type of training that we're doing with our clients. So if we understand recovery is important, we're trying to get back to homeostasis, we understand all of these disruptions that occur in the body due to training and cause fatigue, well, I think that brings us to the next question is, well, how do I know I'm recovered, right? How do we measure and monitor this? There's a few different ways that we can measure it. Now, some are going to be practical, some maybe not, but I want to make sure we cover all of them so you see the different options out there on what makes the most sense for you. Because this has to be easy, has to be something your clients will realistically do, because if they don't, then it's not going to help you in this process. So keep that in mind as we go through our different monitoring options here. So I want to start with our physiological markers. So there are things internally, signals that occur when we stress the body, when we train. So if I am utilizing my metabolism to create energy, there are byproducts like we talked about. So that's going to signal that we're using energy, we need to do something about it in order to adapt and get better. So we can measure things like ammonia or lactate, for example, to see these increases in fatigue. Or we might look at oxidative stress. So as our mitochondria are being used to support aerobic energy metabolism, again, there's a cost to that. We're going to see reactive oxygen species increase, right? There's going to be oxidative stress, free radicals, which are, again, a normal part of this process. Now, obviously, if any of these things are left unchecked or chronically elevated, that's a problem. But when we see it elevate after training, that's what's supposed to happen, right? Because that's what we're going to adapt to. So we can measure those things. Inflammatory markers is another big one, right? Part of the response to exercise is let's cause inflammation because there's some damage, and we can measure that with things like interleukins. Or even muscle damage, we'll see creatine kinase levels increase. So I can measure your blood. If I see elevated creatine kinase, I know that there is significant muscle damage, and we can assume that you are still fighting that stress. You're not in that completed recovery state yet. So you can see these are probably not very practical, right? Because you're going to have to do blood work in order to figure out all these different numbers, and you're going to have to do it every single time after training to see how the numbers are changing. So most likely we're not doing this. I bring these up though because a lot of the research that you're going to see on this topic, a lot of the research I used to put this presentation together involved things like this, where we stress the body with some type of exercise. We're going to measure things like creatine kinase levels. We're going to use some type of recovery tool, and then we're going to see, compared to a control group, did they get better? So I at least wanted to bring them up so you understand what we might be looking at in terms of recovery, at least from a research standpoint. Another thing we can look at is neuromuscular markers, right? Remember, brain controls everything. So how we might measure your recovery state with neuromuscular markers is we look at strength and power. Going to be two important things. So we already talked about this. So I can see if your strength is X before we started, and now it's at Y, did it get better? Did it get worse? Did it get the same, right? So if you can bench press 100 pounds, and then we come back and we try and do it again, and now you can only bench press 80 pounds, that's a significant decrease, right? Our adaptation to strength training should be you get stronger, at a minimum, maintain. So we can measure something like that. Now, the problem with measuring something like a 1-rep max test, it contributes to fatigue, right? Because it's very intense to test for 1-rep max. So that might not be a practical thing, but again, it's something we potentially could look at. Now, power, maybe I can look at something like your vertical jump or your broad jump, and I can see, are you, again, hitting specific levels? You might see a decrease in, say, 10% or more of your vertical jump. That's a significant decrease in power output. So that's going to make me think, you're not recovered. I might need to adjust the workout as planned, because if I just throw more load, more strain on a system that's not recovered, I might potentially be leading towards that overtraining process. You might even see something called the reactive strength index. So we're going to need a little bit of technology here to do this. This is measuring your efficiency to switch from an eccentric to a concentric contraction as quickly as possible. And that's essentially what we do with plyometrics, right? So we can use technology to give us a score. And again, if we see an increase or a decrease in 10% or more, that's going to make us think that something's going on here. We're probably not going to be able to perform at a high level, so we should monitor. So maybe practical here with some of our neuromuscular markers, maybe not, just depends on the situation that you're in. Next, I want to talk about cardiovascular markers, and mainly we're going to talk about resting heart rate and heart rate variability. And really what we're actually going back to the nervous system here, even though we're using heart rate and heart rate variability as a tool to help us monitor your recovery status. So we have the autonomic nervous system, and within that we have our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous system. So probably familiar with these, but a quick review. Our sympathetic nervous system, that's our fight or flight, right? That's what we're going to respond to stress with. And then we have our parasympathetic, our rest and digest. That's what we're going to respond to more, being recovered. So now these always work together in balance. They both control our heart rate. So think about this. If you're in a stress state, whether you're exercising or dealing with stress at work or whatever it might be, what happens to your heart rate? It's going to increase, right? So that's the response from the sympathetic nervous system taking over. Then if we're more relaxed, we're going to see that heart rate drop down. So what if we measure your heart rate every morning to get your resting heart rate? Now, an appropriate response to chronic training is your resting heart rate should essentially start to decrease, right? As it's taking some load off the heart, and it can handle that better. So what if we measure your heart rate and we start to see it trending upwards, where normally, let's say it's 55 beats per minute pretty regularly, give or take a beat or two, and then all of a sudden it's at 59% and then 62 the next day, and we see this upward trend. So that's telling us, hey, the normal response is at least for it to maintain, if not decrease, but now we're seeing an upward trend in your heart rate. That sympathetic nervous system activity is starting to crank up a little bit. So we can use that as a tool to help us monitor your recovery status. The problem with heart rate, unfortunately, is it's not very precise, right? We're not going to see that much of a fluctuation in your resting heart rate. And it's also a lagging indicator, meaning we might pass the point of you being overtrained and things like that. So that's where heart rate variability comes in. And if you haven't heard of heart rate variability, we're not looking at the number of times your heart beats, right? That's your heart rate. So let's say your resting heart rate is 60 beats per minute. Now, we don't actually see your heart rate beat once every second. It's going to have variability to it. Sometimes it'll beat a little bit faster, sometimes it's going to beat a little bit slower, but on average, it's about 60 beats per minute. Instead, what actually happens is we have this interplay between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you were wearing a heart rate monitor right now and you took a nice deep inhale, what we would actually see is your heart rate start to increase. That's the sympathetic nervous system at play here. So we're going to see that increase in heart rate. Then as you exhale, you're going to see your heart rate decrease. So if you have a heart rate monitor, try it and watch your heart rate deviate. It's going to go up, it's going to go back down. That's what we're talking about here with heart rate variability. So when we see this increase and decrease, we would say you'd have a high heart rate variability, which means we're more in a recovered state. So remember, they work together. It's not an on-off switch. This is a dimmer switch, right? So we're saying we're more in that recovered state versus what if we're more stressed out? Well, that would be a low heart rate variability. So now, whether you're inhaling or exhaling, we're not seeing much deviation there. So that's going to be low heart rate variability. Associate that with a little bit more stress. All right, so yes, we have some need for technology here, but heart rate monitors and other things that monitor heart rate variability are pretty much everywhere nowadays. We'll see Apple Watches, and we'll see Oura Rings and many other devices that will easily measure heart rate and heart rate variability. So again, a little bit of technology, but a pretty easy thing that you can utilize to monitor on a daily basis. Now remember, we're looking for trends here, not individual markers. So you might have had a bad dream and your heart rate just shot up when you woke up. We can't just consider that one thing. Same thing with heart rate variability. If it's one day high, one day low, we don't get a ton of information. We have to look at trends here to really utilize it. And then the last thing I want to talk about for monitoring options is perception, right? Remember, our clients are people, and we can ask them questions and they can give us answers. And I think this is probably what you should utilize more than anything else. We want to combine these things and not rely just on their perception, but it's going to be the easiest thing that we can use. So you can walk in, we're about to do a training session, and it could be as simple as I ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how recovered you are? How recovered do you feel if 10 is the most recovered you've ever felt in your life, right? And if you came in and said, I'm at a 9, 10, 8, right? We can say, all right, I think we're in a pretty good situation. Let's continue as necessary. What if you come in and I'm a 3 today? Well, now that makes me want to ask more questions. Well, why are you a 3? Maybe we did a hard workout and you're just super sore everywhere, right? I need to pay attention to that. Maybe you had a rough day at work, super stressed out, whatever it might be. So really simple tool I can use just to get your perception of how fatigued or recovered you might be. So on the screen here, you see that short recovery and stress scale. So this is just a questionnaire that you can utilize. You can look this up, but it's just going to be 8 questions that are going to monitor different things from muscle soreness to performance, recovery, stress, energy levels, things like that. It's quick, takes you about 10 seconds to go through it, and that's the idea. We need something quick and practical for them to use, but some type of perceptual marker. All right, so we have our different options here. So your goal is to start to think, how can I implement this into my system to get a better idea? The ultimate goal is I want my client thinking about recovery. And that's the most important thing. If they're wearing a device that measures HRV, and we know that sleep is going to help with that, now they're actually asking you questions about how do I improve sleep. And that's exactly what we want out of this, is to get them thinking not just about the training, but how we recover from the training. So we understand fatigue and recovery. We understand how are we going to track these things to see if they actually work. And then we're going to get into our recovery modalities. Before we jump into each one, just a few precautions or things that I want to make sure you're aware of. Number one, research is still developing. We'll never have enough research. We never have all the information. We're just making the best decision based on the information that we have. So keep that in mind, especially within this topic. Research is always changing. So we want to make sure we're trying things, but we're monitoring them to make sure that they are actually working with our clients. I want to make sure I set expectations. And remember, time is needed. So it doesn't matter how great I think a recovery tool is, I still have to have time for those adaptations to occur. So we might do a hard workout. I don't want them to think, hey, you can jump in an ice bath, hop out, and you're ready to go again. That's not how it works. We're just trying to shorten that time a little bit. Then I also want to be realistic. What's practical for them? What will they realistically do? Maybe I think ice bath is a good option for them, but they'll never do it. They just want nothing to do with getting in cold water. So maybe that isn't the best fit for that person, right? Or logistically, it just doesn't make sense. I have no way of doing an ice bath, and I don't want to invest in one, so what else can we do? So that's why we're going to cover a lot of different topics, so you have options there. Okay, remember, use monitoring tools. There is a high degree of variability with how these things work. And with research that we use to make these decisions, we have to keep in mind that research is based on averages. This is any research study that you look at. So when I see a research study done on cold water immersion, for example, and it says that, yes, there are benefits to this and it does help speed up the recovery process. That's great. On average, it helped this group of individuals. But what if we looked at the individuals within that study? What I bet you're going to see is some super responders where when they did it, they saw amazing results from it. But you're also going to have those negative responders where they actually got worse. So if I have a monitoring system in place, it just helps me guide to know, is this helping them or not, right? I don't want to force it just because I heard this was a good tool for them. I want to make sure it is a good fit for that individual person there. Now, with all these things, I want to make sure you progress and periodize. So keep this in mind. If I love deadlifting, I think deadlifting is a great exercise. That's not the only exercise I'm going to give you, right? It's good at some things, but it doesn't do everything. These recovery tools, I want you to think of it as the same way, right? They all bring something to the table. We want to make sure we're utilizing them all in different ways to the best of our ability. And then we're going to progress it appropriately, right? I might have 500 pounds on a bar right here. I'm not going to ask you to deadlift until we've earned the right to be there. So if we're looking at cold water, for example, maybe they're not ready to get in 50-degree cold ice water. Maybe we go to 60 degrees, 65 degrees, whatever it might be, something that are appropriate to where they're at. It's going to create a stress response. I don't want it to backfire on them. So keep that in mind. Even though I'll give you some protocols today, you can adjust them that make sense for the client that you have in front of you. Now, we also have to keep this in mind. Some of these protocols are not going to be appropriate, and they might actually limit training effects. So this is going to be an important thing we need to figure out. Why are we recovering in the first place? Are we recovering because I need to compete again at a high level very quickly? Let's say I work with a lot of obstacle course racers, and maybe they're doing back-to-back days of racing. They need to bounce back as quickly as possible, so I want to prioritize performance. So certain modalities are going to be perfect in that situation. Other ones actually, in the long term, limit training adaptation. So if my goal is to recover for an adaptation, not performance, now I have to pay attention to what recovery methods we're going to utilize. So we're going to go over some specific examples with our modalities on how they might interfere with signaling and decrease some of our results that we're expecting from our training processes. And then the last thing I want to make sure we talk about is, are these things even necessary? Who's the client in front of you? How is their training going? Do we really need to focus on any substantial recovery methods? If I have a client who's doing low to moderate exercise a couple days a week, not really stressing the system too much, I don't need to worry about these things. I'm just going to tell them to eat properly, get good night's sleep, and continue moving and being active. And they're going to have all the recovery they need right there. So a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today are for the clients that are going to higher levels. They're really pushing. They like training, they like intensity. We want to make sure they can expose their body to those high intensities as often as they can while staying as fresh as possible. All right, before we get into our specific modalities, I just want to really quickly touch on how are these actually helping us. And we can break this down into 3 categories. Remember, the goal is to get back to homeostasis. We're going to use recovery methods to hopefully speed up that process. I can do this by helping you relax. What if you're really stressed out after a training session? Maybe we can do some breathing. That's going to help you relax, calm down, to create more of a parasympathetic environment that's going to enhance recovery. Or I might do something that's going to stimulate a response. So short term, it's actually added stress. So cold water is a great example here. If I have you jump in an ice bath, you will have a stress response. It's uncomfortable. You're not going to like being there. But the magic happens afterwards, how your body responds from that stress that's going to help promote quicker recovery. So 2 different ways that we can do it. Both are good in the right situation. And then finally, we have assisting methods. One big thing we'll talk about with recovery is blood flow. We have to continue that blood flow throughout the body and help it out once the workout is over. And that might, if we can assist blood flow, that helps in the recovery process. So something like compression garments might be a nice option there to help assist these internal processes that are going on. But again, don't forget, with all of these, they still require time. We're going to shorten that time, hopefully a little bit, but we're not eliminating it. So here we see, these are the 10 recovery modalities we're going to talk about today. Now, the first 5 you see here are what I consider essential. These are ones that we're going to do on a daily or near daily basis, and really most clients are going to benefit from doing these in some form. Then we're going to get into our final 5, which are going to be our more advanced protocols. These you're going to use sparingly. You're going to use when they're appropriate. So think about your training cycles you're doing with your clients. Are there periods where there is some intense training? those are going to be the times when I want to implement some of these options. Not to abuse them and use every day. We're going to use them when we think they need that type of response there. So let's get started with programming. This is going to be our first recovery tool. And that might sound weird, right? We're talking about exercise. How could we be talking about recovery at the same time? But I think if we set our programs up efficiently, we don't have to worry quite as much about all of the other recovery tools, because if we're smart about it, we're going to allow time in between training sessions. So we just have to be smart about how we set it up. Remember, you can't have everything all at once. You can't train hard all the time. So we're going to quickly review a little bit of the physiology that happens when we stress the body. And to simplify it, I just want to talk about resistance training and endurance training. So two very specific goals that a client might have, two very different adaptations that we're looking for. So with resistance training, we're going to load the muscles, right? We're going to do some form of moderate to high intensity exercise, repeated efforts, repeated strain on that muscle tissue. When those muscles are under strain for that significant amount of time, it's going to create an anabolic response. It's going to send signals out that we need help here. So we'll have an anabolic response, something like insulin-like growth factor is going to be released. When this happens, we're going to activate the mTOR pathway. So this is an enzyme that's, again, going to promote an anabolic environment. So it's going to set a signal to stimulate satellite cells that are going to start to form muscle fibers to help create bigger, stronger muscles and ultimately give us that strength goal or muscle size or hypertrophy goal that we're looking for. So a very simplified version of we resist the muscle. This is the steps we need to go through in order to create a bigger, stronger muscle. Now, if we look at endurance training, a little different stress here. Now we're going to have more lower, moderate, repetitive contractions of the muscle that's going to deplete energy. So when we're in a situation when we're lowering energy within the cell because we're utilizing glucose and fat, or if we're fasting, we'll get a similar response. We're going to see an increase in AMPK, so another enzyme that's monitoring energy levels within the muscle cells. When we see that when AMPK activity increases, now we're actually going to have an effect on our mitochondria. We're going to see mitochondrial function increase, mitochondrial density increase, ultimately leading to better aerobic capacity, right? So we had our goal of strength and size, our goal of better aerobic capacity. The problem is there is an interference effect. These two pathways don't get along. AMPK is going to inhibit mTOR. So if I'm trying to crumble everything together into one workout, they are interfering with each other. And this is where we might get better at a lot of things, good at nothing. So for some people, that might be okay, but it is going to limit the adaptations if we just throw these all together all the time. And I think a lot of the trends we see and the workouts we see posted online kind of fit in here, where it's a little bit of everything, but not really specialized in any one thing. So in a perfect world, we want to separate these into specific training days. So I have a specific goal for a workout. I want to improve muscle size or strength or power, right? Or no, I want to work on endurance. So when possible, we're going to try and split up these different training days. Now I understand sometimes that's not possible, right? Sometimes they might have to put it together. And it's not going to negate our adaptations, it interferes with them. So it's just going to give us less results with the same amount of effort. So if we can be a little bit more efficient, it's going to help us in the long run. So here we see some guidelines that we might be able to follow. These are big windows. Remember, everyone's going to be different. The more training status you have, the longer you've been training, more likely the quicker you're going to bounce back, and these windows are going to be a little bit smaller. If you're new to exercise, these windows are going to be a little bit bigger, so we want less frequency, more time in between. So keep that in mind when you're creating a program. Who's the client in front of me? It's going to give me an idea of how I set this up. So in general, we're going to see about a window of 4 to 24 hours to allow that AMPK process to take place. So with our endurance training, lower intensity, we're going to have a much smaller window. Higher intensity, we're going to have a little bit bigger. So we have to keep that in mind, how much we need to separate these training days. Now with resistance training, we're going to see a little bigger window here as well, 24 to 72 hours, trying to space out these workout sessions. Again, we want to allow these two pathways to take place. They work together where sometimes I want AMPK, sometimes I want mTOR. They just don't work well together, right? But I don't want any one active all the time. So we are going to be switching back and forth we're just gonna spread out the workouts appropriately. Now, if they have to work out, I only have 3 days a week to work out, and that's it, that's all I'm gonna commit to, that's okay, right? Well, hopefully we can get a little creative. One thing that you might do is let's do low intensity endurance training prior to our resistance training. When we follow that protocol, that interference effect is minimized. So it's still there, but to a lesser degree. So that might be an option. If we can do that endurance training first, we might be able to get around this. Another thing is running, again, through some research has showed to be a higher interference effect. So if we can do maybe more cross training, something other than running combined with our resistance training, again, might be a good way to minimize some of that training effect there. So again, let's just be smart about how we put that program together so we don't have to worry quite as much about some of these other recovery protocols. All right, the next one I want to get into is our active recovery. So I don't want to think of this as a cool down, just like I don't want to think of a warm up as, hey, my only goal is to increase your body temperature. We're actively going to help you recover. So this is just going to be low intensity exercise to help restore homeostasis. So we're going to utilize activity that involved the muscles in the training, right? So let's say we were doing a running workout. We're going to run some sprints. So I am going to program this in to your training plan. I don't want them to think of it as a warm-up, workout, cool-down, because then they might think I can skip the warm-up, I can skip the cool-down, all I really care about is the workout. They all have their purpose. So this is the workout. We're going to do this 5 to 10 minute prep protocol, whatever makes sense for the workout. Then let's say we're going to do 5 by 1 minute sprints with a 1 minute recovery in between. And then we're going to do this 10 minute, maybe like a zone 2 or a zone 1 recovery run. So maybe if they use a heart rate monitor, we can give them specific heart rates to follow. But that's the workout. We program it all in there. The magic behind active recovery seems to be blood flow. So when we're doing our exercise, we're pushing blood out to the muscle. And then if we just stop and don't do anything, lay down after a hard workout, that blood is going to have a hard time getting back, that venous return. We rely on muscle contractions to push that blood back to the heart to continue this process. So this is an assisting method that we're going to use to help get us back to homeostasis. I remember when I was running track in college, I'd always watch the endurance guys. They would do their race, push themselves really hard, and then they would keep running. It seemed like forever afterwards, and I would always wonder, you guys are done running. Why are you still racing? Or you're done racing, why are you still running? Because they knew this is how we prepare for the next session, for the next meet, whatever it might be. So we're going to program that in to help them bounce back a little bit quicker. And we see a lot of the benefits here that we get with active recovery. That continued blood flow is going to help clear creatine kinase levels, clear lactate, improve endurance, power, strength, performance on the next training cycle. So all great things here with our active recovery. So really simple thing we can do that we can program right in. So you can see the first two things are all within your control, right? So just by creating a better program and explaining how we can implement it, we're already starting that recovery process before we even talk about anything else. Next is going to be stress management. So this is a big topic, and some of this is outside of our scope of practice, right? But we're going to focus on a few things, hopefully some helpful tips to help them deal with some of the stressors in their life. Remember, exercise is only one, right? They're going to have a lot of other stressors that they're dealing with, and anything we can do to help them deal with those stress is going to help us out. Remember, stress is stress. It's going to stimulate that sympathetic response. If that's all they're dealing with, we don't have that energy left over to help enhance recovery. So keep this in mind. Now, we can use breath work as a great tool to help deal with stress. Really simple thing that we can teach our clients to do. There's mindfulness strategies, meditation, lots of different options, but I think breath is just a simple thing that we can do every day to help them out. So I think there's 3 areas that we want to focus on our breath work. Number 1 is going to be post-workout. So remember, we stress you with some training, and we want to bring you back to homeostasis as quickly as we can. We're going to talk about sleep next, but sometimes if somebody has to work out in the evening, they're kind of, those endorphins are kicking in. They're going to have a hard time calming down and getting ready for sleep, which is going to be a really important piece of recovery. So what if we just help that process? We stress you with the workout. We're going to give you a few minutes of breathing exercises to help bring you back down. We're going to see that increase in parasympathetic activity, reduction in oxidative stress, other great things that are going to help simply by focusing on your breath work. So post-workout, just a great simple thing you can program right into their training. Next thing is bedtime. Again, talk about sleep. It's important. It's going to help them calm down. They might be stressed thinking about things. What do I just get them to focus on their breath so they can ignore some of those things, that to-do list or whatever stressors in their life. Let's just focus on your breath, get you to calm down, and hopefully that's going to help you put you in a more efficient sleep pattern. And then finally is just using it as a stress management tool, right? So when you're feeling stressed, what if I just give you a few breathing techniques to help deal with that? So on the screen, you just see a couple options. Obviously, there's a lot of different breathing techniques out there. I think if nothing else, just make them mindful of their breath, trying to incorporate better diaphragmatic breathing. If you can just do that, it's going to go a long way. But here are a couple drills that you can play around with. So 4-7-8 breathing is just trying to change their cadence, get them to slow their breath down a little bit. So all we do here is we're going to take a 4-second inhale, 7-second pause, 8-second exhale. And we're just going to repeat that pattern. So they're just counting, they're being mindful, they're being present, and all they're doing is thinking about that breathing cadence. You may hear like box breathing and things like that. They're going to work in similar manners. Now remember, progress appropriately. That might be too long of a breath for some people, and now they get dizzy, hyperventilate, and actually we're adding more stress. So they might not be able to stick to those exact numbers, so make sure you start them at an appropriate level. A couple other breathing drills just to help them restore better diaphragmatic breathing. We see the crocodile breathing here. So this is the picture on the top right. Just laying down on your stomach in that prone position, and then taking a deep breath in. With that belly placed against the floor, we have a little bit of feedback. You're going to feel that belly push down, and it's going to feel that diaphragm do what it's supposed to do and expand 360 degrees. As you watch somebody in this position, as they take a few breaths, take some deep breaths, you're going to see their lower back start to rise, and then when they exhale, it goes back down. Again, we're just trying to get them mindful of their breathing. The picture right below that with the sandbag on the belly, that's just if they can't lay on their stomach or in that prone position. Now we're just giving them a little bit of feedback, placing that sandbag there, and they're going to try and push it off their belly just by using their breath. Right? So really simple things we can do post-workout or really anytime. Cat-cow breathing, another great example. If you're familiar with cat-cow, so in a quadruped position, going through extension and flexion of the spine. Now we're just going to associate breathing with it. So as we go into extension, we're going to inhale, and then we're going to go into flexion and exhale and just go through a few different breath cycles there. So great tool we can use to help deal with stresses. So remember, post-workout, pre-bedtime, or just throughout the day to help them deal with stress. All great ways to kind of reset, get them into a better parasympathetic state. All right, we talked about sleep. Ideally, this is probably what we want to talk about first. Sleep is where really a lot of the magic happens. This is where the physiological processes take place to regenerate and regrow. The problem is sleep is very difficult to change. So the reason I talked about the other ones first is because I think they're very easy to implement. But this might be an important piece that we really have to talk about with our client. Just know that sometimes progress is a little bit slower because you're going to have to just change maybe one thing at a time. So I don't think we have to talk too much about sleep deprivation and the harm it does. We've probably all been there, cramming for a test, staying up late, binge watching a show, whatever it might be, how we feel the next day. We're run down, we just don't have it, poor decision making, cravings, all these things associated with poor night's sleep. It's just not setting up a good environment to help us recover, right? While we're sleeping, like I said, that's where the magic happens. We're going to see catabolic hormones decrease, anabolic hormones increase. We're going to see the brain restore. We have the lymphatic system activity increasing, which is essentially washing away some of the toxins that develop and help resetting the brain each night. So getting those, again, we don't know exactly how much sleep, but 8 hours-ish is probably going to be good for most people. So anything we can do to help set that situation up, we're going to consider a recovery tool. So sleep hygiene is essentially setting up the environment, setting up habits that are going to help promote a better night's sleep. So the first question we have to ask is, though, why aren't they sleeping in the first place? I might tell you we need to cool the temperature down, we need to put blackout shades up. All these things might be great options, but what if you're not sleeping because you have an infant and they're up all night? Or maybe your knee is really hurting and every time you move, it wakes you up. So all of my recommendations didn't help you. Now, obviously, some of these are going to be out of our control, and some we will have some control. And sometimes they just don't know why they're sleeping in the first place. So if that's the case, we have a few things that hopefully will help us out. So with sleep, we're trying to restore circadian rhythm. So we have this natural cycle throughout the day, right? In the morning, we're going to see things like melatonin decrease, cortisol increase, body temperature rises to help us prepare for whatever adventures we have that day. And then in the evening, we're going to see melatonin levels increase, core temperature is going to decrease, cortisol levels decrease to help prepare us for sleep. For lots of reasons, those things get disrupted. So we're going to hopefully show a few strategies to help restore that. And I think temperature and light is a great place to start, some of the biggest things that have impacts on our circadian rhythms. So we look at light, for example, right? A lot of it has to do when the sun rises, we're exposed to light, and when the sun sets, we're not exposed to light. But obviously nowadays we have a lot of artificial light. So that's going to interfere with some of our hormones and melatonin production and may disrupt some of those sleep patterns. So ideally what we want to do is when we wake up in the morning, we want to be exposed to light, right? This is going to help prepare us for the day and help restore that circadian rhythm. Then once the sun sets, obviously we can't avoid all light. We're just going to try and limit some of that artificial light. We probably hear about blue light being one of the culprits for interfering with melatonin production. So anytime we can reduce the amount of blue light we're exposed to. So yes, if they can avoid devices, screens, things like that in bed, and a few hours leading up to bed, we're going to see a much better impact there for circadian rhythm. Maybe they can get blue blocking glasses. You can change light bulbs. There's lots of different strategies to help with this. Even installing programs on your devices and computers, f.lux is one of them that will reduce the blue light. So you'll see when the sun sets, your screen is actually going to be tinted a different color to help reduce some of that blue light there. You even have night shift on your phone that does the same thing. So these are nice options. If they are going to be on their devices, maybe we can help limit that exposure there. Temperature is going to be a big one as well. So as I mentioned, as you wake, your body temperature increases. As you sleep, your body temperature decreases. So do we have control over that? Maybe we can set the thermostat. Usually the recommendation is about 60 to 67 degrees to cool the temperature down to about that much in the room for a better night's sleep. Maybe we don't have control of that. There are products out there like chili pads and Oolers that are sleep pads that run water through them, cold water or warm water, that can help you sleep better or wake you up if needed. So, but light and temperature are going to be two big things to help with sleep. Nutrition is going to be a big one as well. Now, a couple things we want to avoid. Obviously, caffeine stimulants, right? So keep those more than 8 hours away from bedtime. Some people can handle that caffeine better than others, but let's just keep that as far away from the nighttime routine as possible. So keep that in mind if they are taking any supplements that have stimulants in it, maybe during their workouts and things like that, that might be a problem. Large meals right before you go to bed is another problem as well. So it's going to take time to digest that food. So probably push our larger meals a few hours before bedtime so we're not laying down with a full stomach and now causing indigestion and other digestive issues. And then water. Obviously, water is going to be a big thing. We need to make sure we're getting enough water throughout the day, but try and push it a little bit earlier in the day so now we're just not waking up to go to the bathroom. So all important things that we can avoid. And then just making sure we're including some good, wholesome nutrition in there, right? Our macronutrients. So if we're protein deficient, we're probably maybe deficient of the amino acid tryptophan, which is going to help with melatonin. So getting enough protein in the diet. Carbohydrates, not too much, not too little, right? Goldilocks, we want to be just the right amount of carbohydrates to help with sleep. Low glycemic index and high fiber carbohydrates probably going to be our best bet in helps to restoring better night's sleep. And then our fats, we hear a lot about omega-3s. Again, they help with melatonin secretion, so making sure we're getting adequate omega-3 fatty acids within the diet as well. So all important things to consider with nutrition. Exercise, like I mentioned, sometimes people have to work out at night. That's the only time they can do it. So the best time somebody can work out is when they're going to do it. So let's just start with that. Now, if I have flexibility, Working out in the morning, just like exposing ourselves to sunlight in the morning, is a great way to help reset that circadian rhythm, because that's when we want body temperature to increase, stress hormones to increase is in the morning. So if that's possible, getting them to work out in the morning. If not, we've already talked about breathing. Let's just do some other things to help calm them down and get them ready for a better night's sleep. And then schedule, we're all creatures of habit. Like, let's just set a good schedule. Let's try and go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, as much as possible to help just create patterns. We follow habits, so let's just get a habit of going to bed at a certain time, waking at a certain time to help resetting some of those circadian rhythms. All right, nutrition. This is going to be our last essential that we have to talk about. So obviously when we work out, we create stress, we create muscle damage, we're using energy supplies, glycogen stores, and we're creating inflammation. We need to build that back up, so the foods we eat are going to be part of this process. So the better foods we eat, the more efficient this process is going to be. So what you see on the screen here, this is the 4R model, which I think is a very simple way to break this down into digestible parts that your clients will understand, so you know exactly what you want to recommend to them. So our first R is rehydrate, right? We want to be adequately rehydrated. Now, how much they need to drink is going to depend on that person. Some people sweat more. Might be a hotter environment, so we want to pay attention to sweat rate, things like that. You can weigh somebody before and after a workout, or they can weigh themselves to see, do they tend to sweat a lot and lose a lot of water that way, or maybe not as much. So it's hard to give specific recommendations, but I think the key is let's go into a workout hydrated, and let's start the hydration process after as quickly as we can. So within 2 hours of the workout, I think it's a good idea to recommend about 16 to 24 ounces of water, and then doing the workout, potentially drinking water during it. Maybe it's in the heat, maybe they do sweat a lot, or maybe we just focus once you're done working out, getting about 16 to 24 ounces per pound of weight loss as quickly back as you can. If you happen to know the weight loss. If not, I think 16 to 24 ounces before and after, you kind of cover your bases there. We might also have to add electrolytes too, because remember, it's not just water we're losing. So adding a little bit of sodium is going to go a long way as well. Refueling, right? So we've used, especially if we're working out at high intensities, we've used a lot of carbohydrates, so we want to make sure that we're replenishing those. Now, do we need to fuel immediately? That's just going to depend on the person, or that's going to depend on the situation that person is in. So number one, are they in a fasted state? Number two, when's their next training session going to be? If they're in a fasted state, we're going to want to replenish and refuel as quickly as we can. If they're needing to train again less than 24 hours, now we're going to stress the importance of refueling, getting those carbohydrates in as quickly as they can. Repair, do we do exercise that's creating muscle damage? And this is going to be important that we get enough protein. Remember, protein, we don't store amino acids. They're going to be in the system roughly 4 hours, so we just want to make sure we're consuming protein every 4 to 6 hours to support this anabolic process of repairing muscle tissue. And then finally, rest. We've talked about rest. We want to make sure that we're doing things to help restore a better night's sleep, right? So 4 simple parts to nutrition that we're going to want to make sure we focus on. All right, the last piece that we're going to go through today is with our recovery modules or modalities. These are the pieces a little bit more advanced. So we're just going to touch on them, know that they're going to be more appropriate in certain places than other. So the first one, pardon my pun, one of the hotter topics in recovery is going to be water immersion, cold water immersion. So yes, there's cryotherapy and there's other options, but a lot of the research is on cold water immersion, so we're focusing primarily on that one. We need to look short-term and long-term. So when we jump into a cold bath, remember, it's a stimulating effect. It's going to be, the magic is afterwards. We're creating a stress response once we get in that water. But what the research is showing, after cold water immersion, we have a lot of benefit. We see faster recovery with strength performance, sprint, power training. We see decrease in perception of fatigue, right? It's uncomfortable to be in that bath, and when you hop out, it feels pretty good. We see decreases in inflammation, reducing in muscle damage. So all great things, so in the short term. So if I need to bounce back quickly, cold water immersion might be an excellent option. But remember, we had all these signaling processes going on. So inflammation is normal, stress is normal. All these signals, if we eliminate them, we might hinder or inhibit the adaptations that we're looking for. So now if my goal is to get stronger, when we do cold water immersion, for example, we see on the screen here, the study showed in terms of muscle size and strength, we had significant decreases when we regularly did cold water immersion. So this is a big problem. If my goal is strength training or hypertrophy, cold water interfered with it. Now, if we look on the flip side, endurance training, we actually had the opposite effect. We saw increases in aerobic capacity. PGC1 alpha increase, which increased mitochondrial biogenesis. So we had more mitochondria being more efficient. So using cold water after endurance training actually was helpful. So it's important that we remember what we're stressing the body with and how we're trying to recover. Are we recovering for performance? Are we recovering for adaptation? So some general recommendations if you are going to use it. Typically we see 54 to 57 degrees for about 10 to 15 minutes. Contrast therapy, now we're just alternating. So we're going to go cold water, hot exposure, could be shower, bath, sauna. We're going to have a lot of similar benefits here. Here we actually have, again, kind of that assisting process. The cold exposure creates vasoconstriction. The hot exposure creates vasodilation, alternating back and forth. We're improving that blood flow, speeding up clearance of some of those metabolic byproducts. Research is a little bit split on this one. We see some pretty similar benefits to cold water immersion. I think probably the best place to use this is for those that are not going to do cold water immersion. They just don't want to get in an ice bath for 10 minutes, but being in there for about a minute or so is something they're willing to try, knowing they can get into heat afterwards. So I think of this as kind of a good progression if you want to try cold water therapy, but benefits are going to be pretty equal here. Next, looking at compression. I mentioned this is a great way to assist the recovery process. So we wear form-fitting gear that's going to reduce vibrations, reduce stress on the muscle, but it's also going to push that blood flow back. So remember, we're relying on muscle contraction to help with the process, or compression gear can be helpful here too. Now, the biggest area where we see these benefits is with eccentric strength training, or eccentric training, strength training, plyometrics, things like that have found compression gear to be helpful in reducing muscle soreness, clearing lactate, creatine kinase levels, and things like that. So using it in those situations. But not only did they have to wear the compression gear during the training, they had to wear it for several hours afterwards. So just keep that in mind to get some of the benefits that we hear about with compression gear. You also might hear something called pneumatic compression. So a common brand would be Normatec. So we see those boots where they're creating that rhythmic compression that's essentially like a massage. So again, we see a lot of benefit with this, but primarily short term. So again, if we're trying to bounce back quicker, that seems to be where the biggest benefit is for some of those devices. I'd also like to throw massage therapy in here as well. That's probably going to be more effective than what we see here, but it's a similar process. Massage is going to help be a little bit more effective for clearing some of these metabolic buildup and byproducts, for reducing muscle soreness, and for restoring us into a better recovered state. We also have that perception as well. It feels good to have a massage. But practically, they're probably not going to be able to do this every single workout. So compression gear, or maybe even foam rolling, is going to have a similar effect. But if I know they're going to be going through more stressful times, maybe I want to remind them, hey, let's schedule some massage work in to help with this process as well. Next, vibration. So vibration therapy. The one warning I give with vibration training is most of the research we see is on whole body vibration. So where people are standing on platforms, stretching, performing exercises on a platform, versus percussion guns, foam rollers, other devices that vibrate. So we're making a little bit of an assumption because we don't have as much information on those specific devices. But just to talk about vibration in general, we do see a lot of benefit here. So this is something we can use both before workouts and after workouts. So before training, we're stimulating blood flow, right? We're gonna get blood flow go more to the skin. Those vibrations are actually gonna stimulate sensory receptors like muscle spindles. This is significant because it's gonna help actually lowering firing threshold, so more muscle fibers are gonna be active or easily engaged during your training, which is gonna help reduce soreness afterwards. If you picture, if I have one muscle fiber engaged versus 100, that one muscle fiber doing all the work is gonna get much more damage than if I had 100 to disperse that load. So it's a great way just to help to reduce soreness post-workout. Stretching and vibration has also been a great way to show a reduction in muscle soreness as well. So these are all great things that we can use. Now, if we're gonna use vibration before training, it's important we can overdo it. So we wanna make sure we keep the duration short. A minute or less per muscle group is gonna be ideal. We do get a lot of benefit doing afterwards, some of the similar things that we just talked about, increasing blood flow, clearing byproducts. Now we can spend a little bit more time afterwards because we're not about to go into a workout. So you have options with vibration therapy, both before and after. Final thing I wanted to talk about, sauna. So we talked about cold, we need to talk about hot as well. Again, another form of stimulation where we're going to initially promote a stress response. You get into a sauna, core temperature increases, sweating rate increases. It is a form of stress, but we have an adaptation to it. Now, we have different types of sauna. A lot of the studies you see are going to be on finished sauna, but know that will change different humidity levels, temperatures. Infrared sauna is really popular now. We can penetrate deeper through the skin at lower temperatures. So just to be aware, there's lots of different types of sauna out there. We want to pay attention to short-term versus long-term effect, just like we talked about with our cold water immersion. What we actually see here is almost the opposite, right? So we've noticed a reduction in performance immediately post-sauna. And just think about it, if you've ever had to perform in the heat, humid environment, it actually increases central nervous system fatigue, making it more challenging to perform. So short-term, if I have an event the next day, I probably want to stay away from the sauna. Cold water might be a better option. But long-term, we're actually seeing an enhancement of endurance adaptations. So we see an increase in cardiac output, increase in blood volume, hemoglobin, all things to help aerobic capacity. So long-term use of the sauna, better adaptations, just know there's going to be a hindering or a detriment short-term. So again, why am I doing these things? It's for faster performance recovery or for better overall recovery with adaptations. So I know we covered a lot, but quickly I want to make sure we talk about some applications. I want all of this to be practical for you. So when we apply, remember, time's going to be needed. We're just shortening that time. Why are we recovering? Is this for competition, performance, or is this for adaptation? I want to keep that in mind. Is this even necessary? Are they training at high enough intensities? And then program the essentials in there first. So remember the first 5 we talked about. Let's focus on those, and then we'll use the other ones when they might be appropriate. So hopefully this chart here kind of simplifies everything that we talked about. So anytime, what should be the things you're doing anytime? Those are our essentials, right? We write programs that decrease the need for some of the other ones. We talk about breathing, sleep, nutrition. If I'm doing training that's more strength-oriented, increasing muscle damage and soreness, maybe compression, maybe just immersing in water, not necessarily cold water, but just something to deload the body is going to help restore the recovery process. Vibration, massage, foam rolling, all of these are going to be great options. And then finally, our cardio training, things like active recovery, cold water immersion, sauna, contrast therapy, all of these are going to be great options to help speed up that process. So hopefully this at least gives you an idea of what the appropriate method is going to be based on the type of stress we're putting on the body. All right, guys, I know that was a lot of information that you can see why I'm so passionate about it, because there's just so many different directions. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of our topic today.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much.
Yes.
That is a lot of great information.
Yes.
And so we're going to take just a bit of time here for some questions.
Okay.
Hopefully let all of that sink in, if you will.
Hopefully a lot of notes were taken.
Yes. Okay, so thank you all for joining us once again. And if you have questions and you're watching live right now is the time to type in your question, and we'll take that in just a few minutes here with our presenter, Mike Deibler. So before we do that, I know, Mike, you spent a lot of time going through and digging up a lot of research for this, right? Because we're talking about the science and the application. So on the next several slides here, we're just going to be shifting through these slowly. You can take a screenshot if you would like. These slides contain the references that Mike put together for today's presentation. And Mike, as I flip through these, if there's any one of them that you want to kind of call out as special here?
On this first page right here, that 4R model framework, that is a free access article that I think is just helpful. It goes into a lot more detail than I talked about, but just to kind of lay that nutritional foundation, I think is a great resource. Learning more about things like mTOR and AMPK, if you like that part of it, if you like to read about the science and physiology There's a couple great references in there just learning about that whole process as well.
Great.
And then you'll see all the individual specific recovery tools. If you really want to learn about one, there's plenty of resources on here to dive into the science behind the specific recovery method.
Great, great. And we have also not only the references, which are the ones used in the presentation, but also some additional resources. So the next few slides here are those additional resources, like we were just saying, if you want to dig in and learn a little bit more.
And it is a lot of reading. I literally months reading these things, but if you like this topic, know there's just a lot of information out there. And I wish I could have read them all, but as you can see, I have a lot of slides here with articles for you to check out. If you really want to dive in, there's plenty of different directions you can go.
Wonderful. Yes, a lot of great information shared today. Thank you so much. So this is Mike's contact information. Mike, we can get in touch with you on a couple different places.
Absolutely.
And learn and know what you're doing with San Diego Premier Training.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. All right, so remember, if you would like to earn more continuing education credits, there are a variety of ways that you can do that with ACE. And if you liked today's presentation about the science and application of recovery, we have a few other courses that you might be interested in. So you can see on your slide here that we've got Improving Performance Through Breathwork. That's another live webinar, 2-hour event that we've done. We also have the 3 R's of exercise recovery, which is another great dig into some of the information that Mike covered here today, as well as our new course with precision nutrition, sleep, stress management, and recovery. So all of those great courses, plus
Absolutely,
today's, will give you a lot of great information if you're interested in learning more about this topic. So let's take some time for some questions.
Absolutely.
I know we've got a lot of people viewing and watching here today. Some of the questions that are coming through, and one that I want to introduce here, you talked about the first 5 modalities: programming, nutrition, sleep, stress recovery, big things for all of us to be thinking about kind of all the time.
Absolutely.
On a general basis.
Yes.
So of the other ones, the other 5 that you talked about, is there maybe a certain type of clientele or maybe some contraindications that we should be looking for if somebody's asking us about those and we want to make sure that they're aware?
Yeah, I think the contraindications is a great place to start, especially for the stimulation methods that we talked about, sauna, heat, colds. Those are some of the big ones that if they are not ready to handle that kind of stress, that can cause big problems. So if there's heart disease, obviously, or just too much stress in their life, I think those things can backfire a little bit. So you have to understand your client well to know, is this going to be the best fit for them? We want a little bit of a stress. And that's why I hopefully made it clear, progress appropriately. So even if they can't get in very cold weather, they can get in a little bit of cold environment and might be helpful. Other than that, I think it's really important just to know your client. What are they willing to try?
Right.
Because me personally, have had clients that are just like, no way, I'm not going to do it. That's okay.
Yeah.
We're just trying to help in the process. We can do other things.
Great. So one of the slides that you shared was the table, which indicated, and you can go back and rewatch it if you want to see that slide again, was the table that indicated when we could be doing these items if you are more focused on cardiorespiratory training, kind of endurance work, or strength training.
Yes.
So if you're working with athletes who sometimes need a little bit of both,
Absolutely, yeah.
is there a certain way to kind of program these protocols in to benefit them?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I think of it as your daily goal, almost, not the whole program goal. So if I think my goal today is this strength adaptation, so I know cold water immersion is probably not my best option on that day. Now, what if a day or two later, remember we talked about mTOR, and again, 24 to 72 hours, we have time there we need, but that's when we're going to consider cold water because maybe they're doing a long run or something like that the next day or 2 days later, and now cold water might be a great option for them.
Great.
So think on a daily basis, you can absolutely mix these things up. Just try and avoid close contact with the style of training that you did on that day.
Okay, perfect. All right, so one more question here
Yes.
before we end for today. If we're working with clients, a lot of clients might, be our active agers, for example. And you talked about monitoring and knowing the client, understanding their stress levels. Are there particular modalities that are better or more suited or maybe less suited for those clients who we would consider active agers?
Yeah, again, it'll depend because I've had individuals who are all about some of these things at an older age, and they've bought the ice bath, they've bought the sauna, they've had that that income that they're okay doing that and they wanted to play around with that, and others not so much. So I think starting with simple tools first, like something like compression garment, I think will go a long way, that most people can handle something like that, and it's not too much of a stress on the body.
Right.
Obviously, all the essentials that we talked about. Sauna tends to feel pretty good as long as it's just like your resistance training. Think small exposures, so a little bit of heat. And that's why I like contrast therapy, if they're willing to do something like that, even if your contrast is you go in a sauna and you step out. It doesn't have to be like, let's go into cold, let's just get out of the heat. So think of it that way as well, where you just little bites and see if it's something that they tolerate.
Great, and just like regular training, right?
Yeah,
If we're going to program in something new, we try it a little bit at a time and then progress.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so then I think that will protect you from a lot of things, because you know right away if we got in there 30 seconds and they were lightheaded, not feeling good, this is not a good option for that person.
Yeah.
Or they're like ready for more. It's like, okay, we'll go another minute or whatever it might be.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, so a lot of other questions. If you have more and you want to talk with our presenter today, ACE Pro Mike Deibler, you can go to our ACE Fitness Facebook page and you can continue the conversation with him there. Before we close up here today, remember, no continuing education credits are awarded because you're watching today for free. We really appreciate you taking the time out. But if you would like to earn CECs for today's course, you can go to acefitness.org/past webinars after today's event and purchase the recorded version of this event. A recording of today's webinar will go into your MyAce account, and once you pass the associated quiz, you will earn 0.1 CECs. Also, if it is a part of your CEC Power Pass, this course is included, so you can purchase this course as a part of your CEC Power Pass and earn your CECs that way as well. Once again, we've got our ACE Pro Connect app. Make sure and download that as a free resource on your Apple or Android device. Remember to go check out our ACE job board if you are interested in becoming employed or want to find new employees who are ACE certified. And make sure to go to acefitness.org/compass, where you can learn how to navigate your career as a health and exercise professional. And lastly, remember, go check out our CEC Power Pass at acefitness.org, where you can earn all of your continuing education credits for one low price. And once again, today's live event is a part of the CEC Power Pass. And remember, we have another live webinar coming up in just a few weeks, where we will be talking with another ACE Pro and registered dietitian, Justin Robinson. We're going to be learning about combining fitness and nutrition for powerful results. So join us again next month for that. Stay connected with ACE in a variety of ways. We would love to hear about what you thought about today's live event. And remember to tell us what you thought. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Now, let's get people moving.